we'd kind of do the odd thing together. And a lot of musicians start off at art school, and then they decide whether they're going to carry on making art, trying to make a living making art, or ending up making music. And the musicians I've worked with all started off at art school and then went on to make music, but also always have that kind of interest in the background. And quite a few of them make their own album covers and stuff, Dave Matthews included. Anyway, so then I suggested, let's take this a step further and let's do it properly. And he said, I'm quite nervous. I said, well, no one's ever died making a painting, you know, this is a perfectly safe thing to do. And I was working with silkscreen, printing silkscreen onto canvases, which I'd started a few years before when I did this Mandela exhibition in Johannesburg, using Benny Gould and drum photographs of Mandela silkscreen onto paintings, very much in the style of Warhol, with repeat prints. And because I was working with oil on canvas and using oil-based silkscreen inks, whereas now all of it is water-based because of the kind of hazardous chemicals involved, I had to look for someone in New York who would be able to help us with this process. And there was only one person in New York who I tracked down through the kind of printing fraternity there, who still works with oil-based inks, and his name was Alexandre Enrique. He's in his 70s now, and he printed a lot of the silkscreens for Andy Warhol in the 60s and 70s. And Andy also used oil-based inks. And we went to his studio in Brooklyn and did all this work there. So what happened is, before I arrived in New York, I would send David pictures, images, and he sent me pictures, and we decided to then have silkscreens made of some of those pictures. And then as soon as I arrived in New York, he took photographs of me in my Fat Man suit. So this video you can kind of look at next door. It's in two parts, and the first part is where I'm dancing in the street in New York, in the Bowery, and I've got no music. I'm just dancing in my Fat Man suit, and David shooting with his iPhone. And then there was this kind of graffiti wall by chance in on the street with all sorts of different graffiti. And one of the graffitis, ironically, was actually taken from his latest album cover, which he had done, of a starving man. And somebody had copied it and put it on the wall, and there I was dancing underneath it in my Fat Man suit. So I loved that whole kind of thing, the way that unfolded. And then he had playing now in the background this previously unreleased track, which he found very moving and he thought was one of his best pieces, and he'd never released it before. So they then put the music to the Fat Man dancing in that video that you hear. And at one stage, one of the only words he says is Itica Pritica at the end, which doesn't make any sense at all, but we decided to call the show that. And then we started working, and you will see in the second part of the video us working and the process at the silkscreen guy. And at one stage we're literally physically rolling around in paint on this big canvas, and we'd work on a series of original canvases, of which two have been sent from New York. When I arrived in New York, we went on a boat trip around the island of Manhattan. I took these photographs of the skyline, and we started putting everything together. And there was a kind of amazing kind of amalgamation of styles, because like, for instance, that painting there is an original, which, you know, we would then silkscreen image onto. So while we were painting, we would then hand them over to Alexander and his assistants, and they would then start silkscreening on top of the canvases. So these two are those examples. And we made very sure that we kind of worked 50-50 on each of the images, so there was no kind of, you know, too much of one artist working more than the other. And then we would choose certain of the images, certain of the paintings that we'd done, and decided to do limited edition silkscreens of them. So these smaller ones are all an edition of 48, and the quality of the silkscreen, I don't think is surpassable, because of the guy printing them as being such a great technician, Alexander. that you have to register when you print a silk screen in colour. You have to register 4 different silk screens perfectly each time, and print each piece of paper 4 times. So it's quite sophisticated and quite complex. And with the advent of digital printing, traditional silk screening methods and that type of thing have been very misunderstood, because nowadays it's basically a photocopy, whereas this is the real thing of making a silk screen in layers. And so, yeah, the show, we then put on the show in New York at the Everard Read Gallery, and that was a huge success, and I wanted to bring it out to South Africa, and so that's what we've done. And you have a combination of originals and the limited edition silk screens. So that's the kind of, in a nutshell, what it's all about. If there's anything else, please ask.
How old is Alexander?
Alexander's in his 70s now, and a fantastic character, and completely unconventional. They smoke in there. The fumes are crazy. You'd think in New York there's all these rules and they'd wear gloves and gas masks. Not at all. It's just like, it really is quite a kind of rough and tumble thing. And what I like about working with him, and then I'm doing a big series of work with Brian Eno at the moment in London. It kind of does remind me of you'll stop for a tea break at kind of 10 o'clock in the morning, and it reminds me weirdly of builders, having a cup of tea between them laying bricks. I mean, there is something very basic and very, as far removed from the kind of glitzy world of rock stardom as you can imagine in the actual process of making. And I show when they're making, well, I've seen recording music with other artists, there's a very kind of basic worker ethos going on, which I like very much. Yeah.
Do they not do any oil printing here? I mean,
well, I'm doing it.
Yeah.
At the moment I'm doing quite. I mean, my Johannesburg exhibition, I've done that. Yeah, and it's a very smelly process. Because the chemicals are quite hectic, and when it comes to cleaning the screens, I take it outside, and my assistant wears a gas mask. But there's nothing to compare with oil-based ink as opposed to. Because the thing is, I'm printing onto oil canvases, so you can't print a water-based ink on top of an oil canvas.
So was that printed there? I mean, the figure.
Yeah, as was the repeat of the sky.
Oh yeah.
On an abstract canvas, where we actually used a broom, I think it was. Certainly, those very wide brush strokes there are using a broom dipped in oil paint. And then the city underneath the figure is actually a photograph from a high building in Cape Town of Workcar.
Are all the photographs that you and Dave took?
Yeah.
Okay,
So he took a photograph of me in Flatman. But first then we went into Canal Street store, and there was these amazing rolls of glitter paper, swimming pool paper, and then there was a shiny silver paper. So as we unrolled it, it made these weird distorted reflections of us, and he took that photo of me. Maybe you want to come to